Welcome to Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute podcast. Today I am joined by Joanne Skousen. She is Associate Editor of Forecasts and Strategies, Associate Producer of Freedom Fest, and the founding director of the Anthem Libertarian Film Festival. Ms. Skousen, thank you so much for your time.
Hi, thanks for having me.
What is the Anthem Libertarian Film Festival?
Well, it's a venue that I started about 11 years ago. I wanted to create a venue for libertarian filmmaking, for people who care about individuality, choice, accountability, and the freedoms that are vouchsafed in the Bill of Rights in particular. So I figured if we had a place for them, they would come and they would start making movies, and that's what's happened. So I'm really happy with what we've done.
How would you explain the importance of movies and narratives when it comes to changing public opinion?
You know, we really think with our hearts in a lot of respects. And you can give a lecture, you can present statistics, but what really makes a difference is telling a story. I'll give you an example. We had a film called Everything a few years ago. It was about the problem of not being able to sell bone marrow. Bone marrow can or be compensated for that. Bone marrow regenerates, it's like blood, but people couldn't be compensated for it. And a woman's daughter was dying from kidney disease, not kidney disease, but leukemia, had a match. But because the woman who was the match couldn't take 6 weeks off from work, she said no. And you know, I can tell you that story and you say, yeah, okay. But when you see the movie based on the story, your heart just goes out to each of these women and the child, and your heart just says, this law has to be changed. And it was changed. I had another film called Seized, a short documentary about the problem of civil asset forfeiture. The story was so compelling that many states changed their laws based on seeing that film and understanding what it does to an individual who's wrongfully accused, whose car and money are confiscated because they might have committed a crime. We have a presumption of innocence in this country, and it's not happening when people are having their goods seized. So when you enter somebody else's life, their heart, their experience, and feel it with them, it makes such a stronger impact than just words.
There is a great quote that I came across in the Journal of Libertarian Studies. It says, because the general public is not used to or capable of abstract reasoning, high theory, and intellectual consistency, but forms its political views and convictions on the basis of historical narratives, i.e. of prevailing interpretations of past events. It is upon those who want to change things for the better, liberal, libertarian future to change and correct such interpretations and propose and promote alternative revisionist historical narratives. When it comes to historical narratives, we see books like The Jungle, movies. I know it was a book, but the movie The Grapes of Wrath was very big for me growing up in school. When it comes to movies that you think are relatively mainstream that really have libertarian themes, which movies come to mind?
For me, the first one that comes to mind is Jennifer Lawrence's probably first movie, maybe her second, but Winter's Bone. Here's a young girl in high school. Her father has used the house as collateral for bail money. If he doesn't show up for his trial, then their house is going to be taken. All of their property will be taken, and he's gone. He's disappeared. The mother is intellectually incapacitated, probably from using bad drugs, and this girl is responsible for her two young siblings, and trying to figure out what happened to her father so they don't lose the home. She never goes to the government for help. She never asks the neighbors for help. She just plows through and gets it done herself. At one point, a neighbor brings some meat, a haunch of a deer, I think it is, and says, I thought you could probably use this. She does only as much as the girl absolutely needs. She brings the meat. She doesn't cook the food. She doesn't provide anything else. She just says, here, I'll share you this meat, and the girl does the rest. At one point, they're out shooting a squirrel, and she says to her little brother, and sister, who's hungry? And they say, we are. And she says, well, then come over here and help me cook it. She does only what can't be done for themselves. She ends up, so she never asks for help. She does it herself and she succeeds. And I think that's a great example of a libertarian hero. Has nothing about fighting against the government or protesting or anything like that. It's just an individual solving a problem.
I think that's so important because a lot of times in Hollywood, it's not like this movie is about why progressivism is correct and why the state should be really big. It's always like the movie's about something else and they'll passively mention, oh God, we got to pass a law for that thing. Those evil rich people. Yeah, God, we got to start regulating them. We currently have no regulation in the financial sector. They'll like just these passive lies or total misinterpretation of things that just fly by you and you don't even recognize them.
We had a film in 2017, I think it was, our grand prize winner called Little Pink House by Courtney Balaker. Great example of what you're talking about. Wonderful, wonderful production values. She had Jean Triplehorn and Catherine Keener as the stars. It tells the story, again, of eminent domain and asset seizure. Well, not asset seizure. They were forced to sell their homes. But the production values were so good and the story so compelling that everyone involved in the cast, whether they were, whatever their political persuasion, they said, this is wrong. This should never have happened. And so the story itself made it self-evident. We're actually focusing on that with our filmmakers reception and masterclass this year, which is open not just to filmmakers, but to anyone who's interested in filmmaking. And we really want to see a renaissance in libertarian filmmaking. We want to see more of a focus on the quality of the filmmaking, the quality of the storytelling, and let the messaging just be incidental, powerful but incidental, rather than making the message the main thing and kind of saying, well, okay, the production values aren't that good, but it's a really important story, so we'll just accept it anyway. We want the entertainment value to be increased and the production values to be increased so that everyone wants to see the movie. And oh, by the way, there's a really good message there.
Did you see 2000 Mules?
I have seen it, yes. In fact, I've written a review for Liberty Magazine of it.
I just wrote a review on the Libertarian
Institute.
Yep, we'll have to go head to head one of these days. We'll have to go head to head.
I know.
So my take is I go into these things with such a low expectation that I loved it. I was so impressed by the diligence, by the research, by his ability to get Prager and Kirk and Elder, and their Elder's one of my heroes. So I really like that. I thought it was great how his first case was the North Carolina voter fraud from a Republican. Like everything else that's evil, it's bipartisan. So he wasn't being a total hack like that. I do feel that the biggest thing he missed was the concept that, well, what we need is to accurately count the votes. The reality is that government, based on coercion, whether the votes are accurate or inaccurate, we're still dealing with what he would say violates the principle of thou shalt not steal and thou shalt not murder, what God says in the Ten Commandments. So I believe his principles are a little astray there. But overall, I thought he made a very compelling case. Which
I was really impressed with the evidence, the geo-tracking in the video, putting those two together. And I was also impressed with his restraint. He never once said, therefore Trump should be elected or should be instated. He never says that the vote should be overturned, because he acknowledges, as Gorka does, that it's the perfect crime. It can't be overturned because you separate the evidence. The signed envelope and the ballot are separated. There's no way of ever knowing who those ballots were signed for, voted for. All you can know is that there were a lot of ballots stuffed into boxes. I also thought he exhibited great restraint in not identifying the nonprofit organizations, the stash houses that they were. I thought that would have detracted from what was actually happening, because this rises above politics. This goes to the core, as he says, of our constitutional democracy. Are we going to have a constitutional democracy, or are we going to have an artificial democracy? And so I thought he did really, really well. And I thought True the Vote also showed great restraint in how they were very conservative in which cell phones they counted, that they had to have at least 10 visits to drop boxes so that you couldn't say it was a coincidence. I thought it was a very impressive film.
One of the first movies that I watched that really showed me the importance of narrative or storytelling was Richard Jewell, a movie. I think it was directed by Clint Eastwood.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wasn't too big on saying it. It's like, look, I already hate the FBI. Governments have killed, hundreds of millions of people in wars and democide. I don't need to find out that they harassed someone. But realizing the heck that they put this guy through when they had no evidence, which totally matches up to the real story. It's like one of the worst things. If you have a stalker, that's bad. Well, imagine if your stalker has like $1 billion a year budget. Well, it's so bad. So that movie really communicated to me. Well, were there any movies you saw that were your first big, wow, we libertarians need to really start getting into this?
I'll have to think about that. I remember one thing that really stood out to me with Richard Jewell was Kathy Bates. When she comes to the door and she has her yellow gloves on because she's been washing dishes, and you see the pride in her face because they've come to talk to her son. And then as her face changes when she realizes they're there to arrest him, she's just masterful in that movie. I see so many films. I can't really say this was the first one that did it for me. For me, what brought me to libertarianism was a conversation I had on a second date with the man who would become my husband. I grew up as a social democrat. And as we sat in this little fast food place and ate scones and talked about economics, it just was the light bulb moment for me. Everything that he said about the free market made perfect common sense. And I realized that I had been not lied to, but misguided through all of my growing up years, and that the government really isn't the answer to everything, and that I'm motivated by profit and by reward and by having good things happen, good consequences. And why isn't everybody? And it just changed everything about how I saw that. Some other movies that I really like, and I'm trying to think of the name of this one, took place in Canada. A man, Genevieve Bujold is in it, and the name can't come to me, but a man who is just trying to build a house, and he's a master shipbuilder, but he doesn't go through the licensing board, the zoning board, and he doesn't get his and ends up having to tear it down. That's another story that just tugs at your heart. He knows what he's doing, and what he does goes beyond what the code would require. But because he doesn't have that permit, he can't build his house. That one was pretty impressive to me as well.
Yeah, and then there's real life stories. A guy named Elvis Summers in Los Angeles, homes were confiscated because they weren't up to code, and the people went back to being homeless. Jay Austen in Washington, D.C. did the same thing. The two places where there's tons of homelessness, not to mention a lot of crime, which you as someone without a house would like to be a little safer from, the state just confiscates it. It's unbelievable. I heard that your favorite quote was, "No success can compensate for failure in the home." What does that mean?
That's one of my favorite quotes. What I mean by that is that I kind of did things backwards. I got married, I raised a family, and then I went to college, got my graduate degree, and started a career. So I felt it was really important and rewarding to be the person raising my children rather than put them in daycare, or not that that's the answer for everyone, and I certainly don't condemn anyone who chooses to do that, but that was important to me. Another favorite quote of mine that probably is more apropos for this conversation is, "I teach them correct principles and they govern themselves." I think it's really important to teach people the proper principles, long-term, that have long-term consequences, and then make decisions based on those principles, and not just on rules. A good example of that, you mentioned God, so I will too. Jesus makes that point when the ox is in the mire, and the long-term principle is to be a good steward over the ox. The short-term rule is not to do labor on the Sabbath. And so putting the principle first, you get that ox out of the mire, even though it means working, because that's the long-term principle. when I was the director of the Center for Academic Excellence at Mercy College, I was in charge of 100 writing specialists, and I would have a couple of professional development seminars every year to just help us, share ideas. But I always told them, these are the principles, and I trust you to make the best judgment. So if they didn't have to contact me every time and say, well, the power went out, or the computer's down, or I know we're only supposed to go till 5 o'clock, but this student can't come till 6. What should I do? I didn't need them to contact me to do that. I hired them because I trusted them, because they were skilled, because they were smart, because they were educated, and I could trust them to make the right decisions. I learned that also from John Mackey, his book, Conscious Capitalism. One of his principles in running Whole Foods was he hires good managers and good employees, and he trusted them to make the right judgment when things didn't happen as they were supposed to. When there was a big blizzard in Wisconsin, he trusted his manager to make the right decision, who wanted people to get their stuff and get home before the blizzard hit. And so he just turned off the cash registers and let them quietly go through and while the power was out, because that was his judgment of the right thing to do. And the second part was, if you're going to trust someone to make the right judgment, you don't get mad at them if they make a different judgment than you do. So I really like that quote, I teach them correct principles and they govern themselves. I think that's a totally libertarian point of view. Way to go.
What was the biggest lesson you learned from teaching inmates in prison?
Teaching incarcerated persons. I loved that. I taught at Sing Sing for 11 years. And I learned a number of things from that. One is don't have televisions. They were much better students during the 10 years that they didn't have TVs. And then all of a sudden, the prison decided everyone should have televisions, and suddenly they were distracted from working. But education really is the key to getting out of the trap. The recidivism rate nationwide, the rate at which people go back to prison, is about 62% after 3 years and about 72% after 5 years. Most people go back to prison. And why do they go back to prison? Because they can't get a job. They can't support themselves. So they go back to the under the table stuff, the dealing in drugs or stealing or whatever, and they go back to prison. For many years, our recidivism rate of the people who graduated from our program was 0. For almost 15 years, none of them went back to prison because they could get a job. Now, it's not quite that good anymore. It's closer to around 2 or 3%, but 2 or 3% compared to 75%. And what makes the difference? It was education. And here's the other thing that made a difference, because lots of correctional facilities do have college or high school or some kind of education. What made a difference with the Sing Sing program is that it was privately funded. In 1995, Governor Pataki took away the Pell Grants and said, we're not going to pay for former criminals to go to school when middle-class New Yorkers can't afford to pay for their kids' education. So he took away all the grants, took away all the state money, and education started to go away. And then a group of private people, starting with a woman who was in the Catholic, one of the Catholic Services volunteers, got the money to just let the ones who were already in the program graduate. And it was so successful that now it's been going on for almost 20 years and highly successful. And I think a big part of it was that we demonstrated we cared, and they knew that somebody believed in them enough to put their money into it. It was a privilege to be in the education program. When they were on the outside, you had to hide that you were smart. You had to not act white, as they often say now, and so pretend like you didn't like school or not. And so, but at Sing Sing, the cool kids are in school. I used to have people come up to me all the time, other people who were incarcerated who were maybe working in the halls, and would say, Professor, how can you get me into the school? How can I get into the school program? They really wanted to get in because it was the best of the best. They learned how to study. They learned how to think. They learned how to read. And then when they got out of school, they could get a job. I mean, out of prison, they could get a job. So it was a really great experience. I loved it. Best students I ever taught.
You mentioned that you visited Russia in 1991 and wrote Entrepreneurship is Alive and Well in the Soviet Union. What were your findings after visiting Russia?
I was there several times, 1989, 1991, I think 95, 96,
Wow.
something like that. I was there again about 3 years ago. And it's interesting how it changed. The first time we got there, it was still under very tightly, tight Soviet reign. I remember one of the problems we had was just trying to get something to drink, just trying to get some clean water. I tried to bring several bottles of water with us, and my satchel that had the water was taken away from me as I got on the board, and they put it in the hold, and so it all broke. So we had no water. You would turn on the water in your hotel room, and everything was brown. It was just kind of disgusting. And you were followed. Everything, you were watched. But then in 91, when we went back, you could buy a Pepsi on the corner. There were little stalls, little tables set up on all the roads, and they were selling books or snacks or just anything to be able to make some money on their own. So they learned right away how to be an entrepreneur, how to find something somebody else wants and trade it for money that you want. I mean, that's really the essence of the free market, is that you figure out what somebody else needs and you provide it for them, and then they give you money so you can go and buy something you need. You don't need the government to say, here's what you ought to have and here's how much you can have. I mean, look what's happening in China right now, in Shanghai, where people are being completely locked up in their homes, and the government is providing food for them, and they're starving to death. People are jumping out of windows because they've been locked down for weeks and weeks and weeks, and they can't get any food. So yeah, we noticed that. And then the next time we went back, it was even cleaner and brighter. And the last time I was there, it looked like any European country. It's really sad what's happening now between Russia and Ukraine. I don't think the ordinary residents of either country would want this. This is just totally government organized and mandated. But it was nice to see that change in Russia as we went back and back.
What is the biggest takeaway from your book, High Finance on a Low Budget? Build wealth regardless
Where
of
are you finding these questions? These are all go back to about like 1985.
I was just on the Skousen primary website reading your bio.
Oh my gosh, I haven't updated that in years. I forgot that it was even there. I'll have to, you've given me a goal now. I've got to go back and change that out. I forgot that was even there. High Finance on a Low Budget was a book that we wrote back in 1980, I think. And the main ideas on it are somewhat based on the philosophy of George Clayton's Richest Man in Babylon, which are to save 10% of everything you earn. A part of all you earn is yours to keep. To stay out of debt. To invest wisely. And to then be generous with the rest that you have. If you save 10% of everything you earn and then don't go into debt, if you use a credit card, pay it off at the end of every month, then you'll never be badly in debt. You might owe for a car or a business or a house, but you won't get into consumer debt. And then if you so you stay out of debt, you save 10%, you invest it wisely, and then you can do whatever you want with the rest of it. So it's just a way of controlling your budget, by not actually having a budget, by watching where all of your money goes, and then deciding, is that where I wanted it to go? When we were first married, I started writing down everything I spent every day. I actually started that when I was in college, because I needed to know what was happening with my money instead of just reaching into my wallet and spending it. And I've continued to do that every time my life changes, whether we've moved or we have more kids or changing jobs or whatever. And because we're both self-employed, our income varies widely, by a lot. It might go up or down by 30 to 50% in a year. So we're very careful never to go into debt, always to have savings, and to never spend more than we have, to always spend less than we have. And it's been very, it allows us to react to those changes in income, changes in lifestyle. Now we've got another one with this ridiculous inflation that's coming along. This is going to be devastating. It's very much like the 70s, what we went through in the 70s. We bought a house in 1980 at 14.25% interest only ARM. I mean, that's what you had to do. That's what you had to do back then. And inflation was, I think, around 21%. Mortgage rates were 14%. Then Reagan came in, and because he was long-term oriented, he knew you had to hurt a little bit now in order to get back on the right track, in order to be comfortable later. And he changed all of that. And in just a matter of a couple of years, we were back on the right track. I see us doing that now. What I'm seeing now with the what's happening under the Biden administration is very much like what happened under the Carter administration. And we need better policies. We need someone who understands the market to get in there and say, we've got to look at the long term, not the short term. It's going to hurt now, but we need to get this inflation under control. And I think we can do it because we've done it before, but that's kind of terrifying right now, especially to people who are retirees and don't have a chance to earn anymore. You know, their income isn't going to change. Their wages aren't going to change because they're not wage earners, and they just have to make their 401k3s last for however many years they have left. So it's a tough time.
I am pulling it up on the screen, but for the listening only audience, could you tell us when this event is?
Sure.
The Mirage?
So this is the Anthem Film Festival. I've been running it now for 11 years. And it's in conjunction with Freedom Fest, which has been known as the world's largest gathering of free minds. Mine is the world's only fully juried libertarian film festival. And so I opened my festival for submissions around October, and I get hundreds of films, and I watch all of them. Well, not hundreds, a little over 100 really would be more like it. And then I choose the ones that I think have the best quality and the strongest libertarian message. And then I curate them thematically. So, for example, the one you're looking at right now, The Dystopian Future is Near, I have a lot of films that are about a dystopian possibility or a dystopian what's already happened. Grid Down, Power Up is about what would happen if we had an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, that would destroy all of our electric grids and our computers and so forth, and how would we handle that, and talks about how easily it could happen. On Saturday, I'm doing a collection of films about civil rights, about constitutional rights. We have one on voting rights, one on the Second Amendment, several on First Amendment. Prohibition is about the overreach of the pandemic lockdowns and challenges to that. Roe v. Wade. I had this movie before it even became popular, but we have a film on the legal history of Roe v. Wade, which is really, really important and fascinating, because it never was about the abortion. It never was about when does life begin. It was a privacy issue based on a Connecticut finding that was based on the right to purchase birth control of all things. I didn't even realize this, but there was a time when only married women could purchase birth control, the pill. If you were unmarried, you couldn't get it. And there was a case that argued that it's a privacy issue, and so that's why Roe v. Wade was passed. It was based on a privacy issue and not the abortion itself, not the fetus at all. So that's a really interesting film and very timely. We also have a film from Project Veritas about one of their gotchas with CNN. So it's a great collection of films about First Amendment rights, because after all, what Project Veritas does is a First Amendment right under the right to journalism. So a great collection of films. We also have a lot of comedies, but the comedies too have a libertarian bent. A lot of them are satirical or parodies, taking something like Melons, for example. great little comedy. A man is talking about melons and somebody at a grocery store, and somebody else overhears him talk about the melons, assumes that he's saying something sexual to the woman who's buying the melons, and suddenly he's being canceled and he loses his job and all of this over a complete misunderstanding. But timely, because we do know people who are being canceled because of innocent things they say that are taken too far. Nick Sandmann being a great example. We had a film last year that won the Audience Choice Award called Rush to Judgment, Encounter at the Lincoln Memorial, about the Nick Sandmann case, where just a little snippet of video that presented him as seeming to mock someone, a Native American. When you see the entire story, you realize it was very different, but how quickly that story spiraled through the Twitterverse. And this young man was kicked out of school, and he was brought back in once the real story came out. But so very timely, and these comedies, they're funny, they're fun, but they're also very timely and very libertarian.
That's so important because the Roe v. Wade example is so perfect that I had always thought until recently that it was this woman who wanted to get an abortion, but she couldn't, so she went to the Supreme Court, and then she was allowed to get the abortion. Turns out that's like totally fake.
Babies don't wait that long to get born.
That shows both the ignorance of the reality and of the court system. One day she went to the court and they said, I think the Supremes are going to take this. Get back here by tomorrow.
No.
You just don't know.
No, her baby was born.
Exactly. Do you have time for 3 more questions?
Sure.
You wrote a book, Investment Philosophers and Financial Economists, Secrets of Great Investors. Were there any of the secrets that you thought were just so enlightening that you'd like to share with everyone?
Oh my gosh, that was back in the 1990s. I don't remember what was in it. Sorry.
You know what? And by the way,
it wasn't actually a book. It was a tape series. There was what was it called? The Worldly Philosophers or Great Moments with. Anyway, it was a tape series. Lou Rukeyser was the narrator for it, and it's just been so long ago. And it's not something you can pick up and thumb through it, because it wasn't a book. It was a script for a cassette tape. Who has cassette tapes anymore? So I honestly don't remember.
You know what? And it's my mistake. I got the original link through your bio, but just looked at your Amazon list. So these links were not in your bio. I apologize.
That's okay. I'm sorry. And I thought about this later this morning as I was getting ready for this. I thought, I never sent him any information. What are we going to talk about? And I thought, well, it'll just be the website and we'll talk about the movies. But I apologize that I didn't send you any updates.
No problem at all. Matriarchs of the Messiah.
Now there's a book that I read, that I wrote rather.
What can freedom advocates learn from the story of Jesus, and what role women played in this?
Well, it's not even about Jesus. It's about about the women who are direct ancestors of Jesus. Okay. So if you go to his mortal ancestry, there's a genealogy listed in Matthew. And then you match it up with the stories in the Old Testament, you find this very unusual, eclectic group of women, of course, you would expect, who are his direct ancestors. It's not surprising that it's Eve and Sarah, Noah's wife, Rebecca, because you know that they're the wives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But then you get into these really unusual women, Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, they're all ancestors of Jesus as well. But what I loved about researching this book and writing this book is that women for far too many centuries have been silenced in the Bible. When we talk about those Bible stories, we don't talk about Sarah, we talk about Abraham. In fact, we get angry at Sarah because she laughed when she overheard the messenger saying that she was going to have a baby, even though she'd already gone through menopause. And she laughed, and they go, "Oh, but you laughed." But in the previous chapter, in chapter 17, Abraham also laughed. He fell on the floor and laughed when he heard. And there are different kinds of laughter. There's a mocking laughter, And then there's the laughter that you experience when something so joyful is told to you that you can't help but laugh. We laugh at weddings. We laugh when things turn out well. And I think for Sarah, it was the laughter of joy, just as Abraham had done the same thing. But see, we don't criticize Abraham for laughing. We criticize Sarah for laughing. Same with when we get into the story of Rebecca and the whole plot to help Isaac give the birthright blessing to the proper son, to Jacob rather than to Esau, because she had received a personal revelation about that. And so she knew it was supposed to go to Jacob. She received that revelation when she prayed for herself. See, that's another thing. These women pray for themselves, and Rebecca is a great example of that. And so she does this plot to make sure that Isaac gives the blessing to the right son. And it works. And she's really criticized for being a trickster. And yet we see in this Bible as well, Isaac and Abraham both telling their wives when they're in a difficult situation to pretend to be their sister instead of their wife in order to protect them. So it's okay when the man has a plot and a trick, but it's not okay when the woman does. So really what I do in this book is I give these women a voice. And I also discovered in my research that in the Hebrew Bible, the word helpmeet is actually ezer kenegdo. It's two words, ezer kenegdo. Ezer, help, meaning more than just pass me the screwdriver, be my second mate. It means benevolent savior, a person who gives help from on high, almost like God. The word ezer, whenever it's used, it is a reference to God. And so woman is defined as a savior, not just a helper, but a savior. And kenegdo means equal but opposite. So woman was created by God and defined by God as a savior, equal but opposite to man. So equal, these are two hands and they're equal, but they're opposite. One's left and one's right, but they're still equal. A door, a double door would be another example of equal but opposite. So, and then I use that as the theme going through my book. And as I did that, I discovered that every single one of these women is at the center of the story. And in each case, she does something that rescues her whole family. So I just loved writing it and I love talking about it. What you don't notice a lot of times is that Judah rather, after Joseph is sold into Egypt, Judah goes away for 25 years. We don't notice that. We think, oh, well, we've got this story about Judah, and we've got this story about Joseph, and then we're back to Joseph again. But Judah's gone long enough to get married, raise 3 sons who are old enough to be married. So he's gone at least 25 years. And it's only because of Tamar that he says that he gets back on the right path and goes back home in time to help lead his brothers to Egypt to get food and all that whole story. But Tamar is the one who rescues him. And we just don't notice that. So they're very strong women. They make right choices. They think of long-term consequences. So I see them as being very libertarian because they make choices for themselves based on long-term consequences, long-term principles, rather than short-term rules. Going back to that, I teach them correct principles and they govern themselves.
What else can you tell us about your first meeting with Mr. Skousen? What were the main bullet points that brought you from social democrat to free market advocate?
I'll never forget at one point he said, "My marginal utility for you is rising." I had no idea what he said, but it sounded really good. He just talked about how the free market provides a way that to distribute, to create and distribute goods and services. How it takes raw materials and adds to it innovation and labor and creates something better. The iron being a great example of how you take some iron and you manipulate it and then it becomes a nail or a pin or a wagon or a wheel or something. And so under the mercantilists, there was this belief that there's a finite amount of resources in the world. And because of that, if you wanted to get wealthier, you had to take it from someone else. because there was just this finite amount. So if you wanted more for yourself, you had to take it from someone else. So we had this world empire kind of philosophy going in and taking natural resources from someone else. But Adam Smith recognized that you could make the pie bigger simply by adding to the resources, innovation, invention, and labor to make it into something else that's more valuable. And so you didn't have to just scurry around trying to get a bigger part of the pie. You could make that pie bigger. And that's what the free market does. And what he taught me is that, and what I like to try to teach others about capitalism is that capitalism is a way of saving your resources, not spending everything, but saving your resources, and then using them to create a bigger pie. And you do that by finding out what other people want and or need, or even telling them before they know they need it, and then providing it for them. It makes their lives better, and it makes your life better. When people complain about billionaires, about Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, I just hold up this phone and I say, I can own everything all of the intellectual stuff I need, I can have right here on this phone. All of my contacts, all of my documents, all of my music, everything I need is in this little handheld device that I bought for $350. So if Steve Jobs gets $350 billion, I don't care, because he gave me this, right? He made my life better. When I was a young mother, I watched how diapers went from cloth diapers and safety pins and plastic pants to disposables that originally we had to use with safety pins. And then they had tabs that were like Band-Aids, and you had this little plastic thing that you had to throw away, and sometimes the baby would get it and get it stuck in their mouth. So then they came up with the kind that are self-adhesive, and now you can undo them and put them together. No government agent would ever have created diapers the way diapers are. They even have them for boys and girls depending on whether they pee front or back. Boys pee front and girls pee back. Well, no one would have done that. But the market does it because there's a demand for it, or they create a demand for it. They're always making our lives better, and the price comes down. Our very first one of these was a gigantic computer this high. You had to format every single page, had to be formatted separately. Cost us $15,000, and we were really grateful to have it because we were writing books. Now I've got it right here, or the laptop I'm looking at right now, and cost under $1,000. So price goes down as quality and demand picks up. The market is beautiful, how it decides. Look at what happened when the pandemic started and we didn't have enough toilet paper and paper towels. Georgia Pacific immediately stopped making typing paper and started making paper towels and toilet paper. Alcohol companies started making hand sanitizer. GM started making ventilators. I mean, the market does that. We live in Florida where they have hurricanes, and it used to be that if a hurricane was coming, you had to get supplies by a week ahead because there would be nothing on the stores. Now they supply constantly because they know a hurricane's coming, so they divert trucks to a different place and they get everything where it needs to be. We don't need a government to do that. We have a market, we have businesses, we have capitalists. I take my students at Chapman University to see the statue of Charles Chapman, who founded our university. And I tell them, this is a capitalist. He could have spent all his money on himself, but instead he saved it. He bought this land, he put buildings on it, and he created a school that you could attend because he cared about the future. That's what capitalism does. It's savings that's put to a better use. So I just think the free market is beautiful. It makes mistakes, yes, but those mistakes can be corrected very quickly. Once a government gets involved, you can't get rid of them. But if a business makes a mistake, they either correct or they're out. And so it has a wonderful correcting balance as well.
What you said about the price going down is so vitally important, because it used to be like if I saved up for a long time, I could responsibly go to Barnes & Noble and purchase a book, maybe two, if I had really saved up. And it would have come out $25 a book or so. But now with Amazon, I have saved so much money and gotten access to more information than I ever could have dreamed of. Different points of view. I can get the Communist Manifesto and Murray Rothbard's Ethics of Liberty for so cheap that it's worth actually purchasing them for. I was previously an Obama supporter, and basically with me, it was so similar to what you said, but it was just every shortcoming that the free market had applied tenfold to the government because they didn't face competition and you couldn't opt out of funding them. So, so no matter what, it was like, but what about X? Whatever X was existed under both statism, fascism, communism, voluntarism. So just once I ran things through that methodology, I was just out of it. I mean, I just went from like Barack Obama to Mitt Romney to Ron Paul. Just
let me give you a great example. Just a great example. Corey DeAngelis is one of my heroes. He's been working on school choice for years, and I adore the man because he found the right metaphor. When he said the money should follow the student, and when he said, if I decide to buy my groceries at Walmart instead of Safeway, should my money continue to go to Safeway? No, it goes to Walmart or whatever the grocery store is. That made sense. But recently, our local school system started sending out postcards saying, here's what we're doing and what would you like us to do better, and come and join us. And I just found it really interesting. What we've been saying all along is that school choice is not going to end the public school system. It's going to make the public school system better. And that's exactly what's happening. With the competition of charter schools and private schools and homeschool, the public school is finally realizing we need to do some advertising. We need to step up our game. We need to attract parents to choose our school. Because, you know, in terms of convenience, the local public school is certainly the most convenient to do. So here it is. The school choice is leading to the competition that is going to lead to improvement in our public schools, just like we've been saying all along. I love it.
Well, Ms. Skousen, it was such a pleasure to have you on. I can't wait to meet you in person. I definitely owe you a glass of wine at the Mirage for going for going 17 minutes over our allotted time here. It's going to be July 13th through 16th. If you want $50 off, because I know times can be tough right now with bare shelves Biden, you can use code Horton50, Horton, as in Scott Horton 50 at checkout to the link in the description for $50 off your ticket to Freedom Fest. Ms. Skousen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to the website and update my bio right now. Thank you so much. It was a delight being with you.